you for joining us. We're going to give it a few minutes for people to join us. If you're tuning in from watching the documentary On the Record, we trust that you will find it impactful and that you're here to be a part of the solution to ending gender-based violence. My name is Jimmie Briggs. I'd like to thank Jane Doe Films and Black Women's Blueprint for offering us this opportunity to be in conversation around the film and the deep reflections it brings up for us. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our presenting partners. Jane Doe Films is an award-winning documentary team led by Amy Ziering and Kirby Dick. They are home to some of the most important and groundbreaking investigatory documentaries today, including The Hunting Ground, The Invisible War, and most recently, Allen versus Farrell. Black Women's Blueprint has for over 10 years been a movement to place Black women's lives squarely within the broader political, as well as civil and human rights concerns of African-American communities in the US. In 2020, they purchased nearly 300 acres of land where they are building a reconciliation center born out of their pivotal work over the last 10 years as a convener of the Black Women's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Restore Forward is an invitation to millions of people to engage in reparative justice and move forward into the 21st century, equipped with a collective plan to build a new social contract for gender and racial equity. The Black Women's Blueprint team believes it's important to name and be clear that everyone has a role in ending gender-based violence, not only individually, but also collectively. No one is immune from unlearning gender-based harm, including our trans and non-binary family. We all have work to do, and it looks different based on our social location and intersectional identities. And for the purpose of this conversation, and being consistent with the film On the Record, we will focus on holding space for cis Black men. We are clear that this is not an attempt to pathologize Black people. As Brother Resmaa Menakem, New York Times bestselling author of My Grandmother's Hands would say, Black people are not defective. What we're dealing with is historical, cultural, structural, and intergenerational. There are many layers to this work, and today, we're meeting the work on the surface and on the record by working in solidarity with organizations like BWB to explore, understand, and steward that pathway towards healing. And that's where we come in. My brothers here in this panel and I. What do we need to do to build upon all of our cumulative decades of work in this field to bring forward a 21st century energy to end gender-based violence? I'm going to briefly introduce the brothers on the panel, and then I'll pass it to one of the panelists in particular, Quazzy from Running River Collective, to lead us all in a short meditation. First, I would like to introduce Quentin Walcott. Quentin is the Executive Director of Connect, known as Q nationally and internationally. He's an active anti-violence activist, educator, and writer. I've known Q for many years, so I'm really honored to be in this discussion with he and all the brothers here. Q is one of the leading U.S. leaders selected by the Novo Foundation to participate in its groundbreaking Move to End Violence initiative, a 10-year program to strengthen the movement to end gender-based violence in the U.S. He is also a member of the Residence Network's Governance Committee. Based here in New York City, Quentin was a speaker at the first White House United States of Women Summit in 2016 on gender equality and shared the dais with TV actor and activist Matt McGorry. Quentin was also awarded the United Nations Trust Fund to end the Violence Against Women Award in 2014. He was the first man to receive the now NYC Susan B. Anthony Award in 2012. As co-executive director of Connect, Q and Reverend Dr. Sally McNichol were jointly named New York City New Abolitionists in 2014. Welcome, Q. I also want to welcome and introduce my brother, Corey Greene. Corey is co-director of HALA. Hailing originally from Queens, New York, Corey is a co-founder, co-director, and organizer of How Our Lives Link All Together, or HALA, a nonprofit developed from the organizing work and political strategizing of people who serve sentences in New York State correctional facilities. In addition to being an Echo Green Fellow, Corey, prior to creating HALA, Corey was a recipient of the Ford Foundation's Pre-Dissertation Fellowship and the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Program Fellowship. Corey earned his of Arts degree from LaGuardia Community College, and his Bachelor of Science degree from NYU, New York University. He is a loving father and attributes his work, motivation, and success to his son's existence. Welcome, Corey. I also want to include our brother Quazzy, Kwabena. As I mentioned before, he's the director of Running River Collective. After teaching hundreds of yoga, meditation classes around New York and abroad, Quazzy founded Running River Collective, an organization that amplifies access to wellness. The Running River Collective is a nonprofit organization centered around balanced lifestyles for people of color. Their goal is to connect with marginalized but powerful communities, such as those from the African diaspora, BIPOC, and the LGBTQ+ community, and offer tools to create a healthy and sustainable lifestyle. Running River Collective provides meditation, healing, and wholeness strategies as a pathway for healing masculinities and bridging mindfulness with anti-violence. Running River Collective produced communications and media for Black Women's Blueprint 10th anniversary celebration and its annual March for Black Women. Additionally, Running River Collective produced marketing and implemented Joyous Revolt, Black Women's Blueprint's monthly community engagement campaign, as well as provide a suite of multimedia assets and strategic implementation. Welcome, Quazzy, and you'll hear from Quazzy momentarily. Finally, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Serrano Robinson. Serrano is a boys youth program coordinator for Menace Peacemakers. He previously worked as a senior youth worker at Bethany Crisis Shelter. Working at Menace Peacemakers, Serrano works to give youth a safe space to be themselves within the system they exist. He is passionate about social change. Additionally, he volunteers at neighborhood youth services, as well as being part of the Duluth branch of the NAACP, assisting with the Young Adult Committee, as well as the Health Committee. Serrano is also a mentor for Mentor Duluth. Welcome, Serrano. Quentin, Quazzy, Corey, Serrano, welcome, brothers. So excited to be a part of this conversation and get it going. I want to pass the mic first to Brother Quazzy, who will lead us in meditation. On to you, Quazzy.
Thanks, Jimmie, for the introduction. And thank you for everybody that's tapping in from all over the world. And before we get into the depth of what we'll be discussing today, we'll just take a moment to really ground ourselves in the spaces that we're personally in, so that as we exchange ideas and things get to flowing, we can have a centered source to come back to. So if you haven't had a chance yet in the space that you're in, just take a moment to look around. If it's required of you to shift where you are, or if it's required for you to close a door, whatever you have to do to make this space feel safe for you, if it's in your power to do so, do so. And then from there, you can feel your feet flat to the ground. If you feel comfortable to close your eyes, you can close your eyes, or you can keep them half closed and just allow the face to relax. The moment you allow yourself to settle into this place, we've raised the awareness of our breath. Allow yourself to notice the breath moving in and notice the breath moving out. For so many of us, there's a lot of support that we have to show to a lot of different people in our life. And for another section of us, there may be times where we feel like we don't have much control on what's happening in our life. In these first few moments of our meditation, quietly to yourself, you can say, breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. And breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. You can continue this mantra throughout the entire discussion. If there's ever a moment where it feels as if the breath has been stuck or held, or it needs a reminder that life is consistently flowing through you. The breath is moving in, the breath is moving out, and I'm aware of this space. The safest place that we want to be is in our own body and mind. So allow yourself to really get comfortable with allowing breath to move there. If there's any unresolved tension in the jaw, relax the jaw. If there's any anticipation or unresolved tension in the shoulders, relax the shoulders. You can even think of relaxing the navel and allowing the breath to expand from there, allow it to expand. And if there's an organic need to move, you also can give yourself that freedom because the breath is there in all different aspects of our existence. As we get settled into what we'll be discussing today, allow your breath to be a resource. Allow it to be a teacher. Allow it to be a tool that allows you to stay connected to the moment that you're in. If your mind ever travels to a memory that you'd rather move away from, remind yourself you've positioned yourself in a safe space and that you have the breath to keep you connected. Finally, in this moment, if it's available to you, try to visualize someone in your life that's very easy to love. As you breathe here for yourself, imagine this breath was able to support this person in your life that's very easy to love. You might even imagine that when you inhale, it's big enough to reach them wherever they are in the world. And when you exhale, you're bringing that energy right back to your heart center, right back to your safe space here. If there's someone in your life that challenges you, then take an extra breath for you, not necessarily for them, but for your own well-being, for your ability to continue to get through your day, maybe in spite of the relationship you have with this person. And for this last person, it could be somebody previously thought of, or it could be somebody new. But if there's anybody in your life, whether they be alive or whether they've passed away, that you have unresolved business with, conversations that were not able to be held or have not been held yet. And also allow your breath to move and allow yourself to stay connected to the now space. Take one more breath in for everyone tuning in, because it'll magnify our own vibration. Take a breath to send that out for the awareness, for the accountability, and for the action that'll follow. Ashe.
Quazzy, thank you so much for that, for grounding us in this conversation in our respective spaces and with this community. So grateful to you for that. Two things. One, I just want to set expectations for the audience of this conversation. On the time we have together, this is really meant as a learning, collective learning journey for myself and the brothers here in the conversation, but also for those of you listening in and watching us in the audience. Our hope is that conversations such as this one can be a part of the ever-growing momentum, elevated momentum to address intergenerational trauma and really speak to the truths of Black people, of the larger African American community in this country and abroad as well, regarding the systems that we've all been existing in, surviving in. Quazzy, I want to acknowledge you again for your meditation. I also realized I didn't probably introduce myself. I will be the moderator for the conversation this evening, but as I said in a previous call, preparatory call, really any one of the men on this panel could moderate as well. We bring collectively so much experience to the work through our respective lanes. I just want to acknowledge that. Again, my name is Jimmie Briggs. I'm a native of St. Louis, Missouri, longtime New York City resident, outgoing commissioner for the New York City Gender Equity Commission, longtime journalist, have written about child soldiers and worked for children internationally, and in the past taught at the University of Illinois, Kwabena, as well as the New School for Social Research. As I mentioned before, I've known many of these brothers for years. In the case of Quentin, Walcott, for several decades now. So I'm just so honored to be a part of this conversation. Quazzy, I'll pivot to you first, the first question. It's really a question for all of you, but if you can respond first and then pass the mic, whoever's called to do so, to speak to the question. I invite you to do so. In the documentary, which we've all seen, as well as hopefully those in the audience, on the record, we learned about, over the course of the film, learned about the pressure exerted on the main protagonist, Drew Dixon, as well as the other women represented in the film, the pressure they felt to not report behaviors or hold individuals such as Russell Simmons accountable, because he is and was in a position of power and could make or break their careers. Do you think that those types of conditions, that type of pressure, is still exerted on women, Black women in particular? I'll start with Quazzy.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say I really admired the courage of all the women that spoke on that documentary. And that was very much the foundation that I was understanding Drew Dixon coming from, that for years, she did not want to come forward. But then she had to come forward once her fellow sisters were being called liars and a whole bunch of other things. So it was, through realizing that her voice was like really paramount to both publicly validating all the other women for the public, as well as just letting them know they're not alone, I thought was very courageous. So hats off to for all the women, especially Drew Dixon, for kind of spearheading that with the documentary. It really broke my heart towards the end of the doc when she, I think her words were, she didn't want to let everyone down, and let everyone down in the sense of the hip hop community, the Black community, for how we seen Russell Simmons. She mentioned, I think her words were, she took one for the team, which was, again, just heartbreaking to have to think of it like that, her life was derailed in such a way so that the rest of us could continue to live our joyous lives, or however you want to look at it. And from the lens of appreciating all the work that Russell Simmons did through the hip hop community. This reminded me of a lot that we see with women, especially Black women, having to take the burden that's not even really theirs to bear for the sake of the rest of the community. And, to see these women survive this, and then to have to get their character like dragged through the mud, it's just unbelievable. And one thing she said that really struck me was that when you come forward with the allegations against these people, the person themselves denies it, and they never actually have to say it. But then the survivor is then charged with repeating the act, repeating the words, and then we're having the visual of the woman, but we're having the words that depict what the person did, the harm doer did, and I guess just how we process that. We see her and we see the words and we associate it with her, but the perpetrator in this case, like Russell Simmons, he never has to say it. So it's just a lot that the survivors have to bear, and then also coming forward. It seems like a whole nother journey in itself. It's only like coming forward is only half the battle.
Get that insight, Quazzy. I'll open up for any other brothers who want to weigh in as well, this question.
First of all, thanks to Black Women's Blueprint and Jane Doe for hosting this and putting us in a position to have a platform to talk about this. I think that's important. And Jimmie, I love you, brother. I've known you for many years, and you should be moderating this panel. So I think it's 2021, and we're still having the same conversations. It's still like Quazzy mentioned, it's a burden put on, in particular, Black women, I think women of color in general, to kind of hold up the sky, and we're talking about, hip hop, we're talking about hip hop culture, we're talking about hip hop industry, we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about all of these things that we're connected to. And I think about like Drew and Silai, who's also one of the women in the film, and I've known for many years, and she's been, attacked for telling her story and trying to get truth and accountability, right? So it's a difficult situation to be in, because, what we're really talking about is the price you pay And it's really about, the intersection of racism and sexism, right? So a lot of it is, we think about hip hop culture, Russell Simmons, or any prominent man of color or Black man in industry. So part of it is the fact that they exist within a predominantly white system or industry. So the fact that they exist inside of that is one thing, and we want to hold that and lift that up. But at the same time, sometimes when we get in those positions of power, because we're really talking about power and abuse of power, we tend to mimic the power system that really puts us in a place where we don't even exist in this industry, and it's very far and few in between. So we have to kind of hold the fact that very few of us exist, and then if we want to hold those men accountable for harm they're doing to women or Black women, we're put in this position where, or women are really put in this position that I have to be self-sacrificing once again for the sake of our people and Black folks. And it's almost like an unconditional thing. Like, I'm going to stand for you no matter what you're doing and no matter how you're harming me. And, and men and Black men in these positions of power are very conditional about that. We don't stand up for Black women and women of color in the same ways that Black women self-sacrificing, even though we're the ones doing harm to them, hold up. So I just want to say that, it still exists. Once, racism is gone, we'll still have this question of sexism, right? And classism and all these kind of isms that take shape and dictate our lives. You know what I mean? My work is on agenda, and many of the brothers on this call on the intersection of gender and racism. So I'm thinking about this, I'm living in this, I'm reacting to this, I'm responding to this every single moment of the day. And I can't even imagine if I didn't, exist in this world with male privilege and male entitlement and male expectation in the ways that our sisters do not have, and those who identify as, as women on this planet have. So yes, it still exists.
Peace. I can follow up, man. Shout out to Black Women's Blueprint, and thank you for this invitation to be a part of this important conversation. And thank you for your work for Black liberation too, and pushing Black liberation and our consciousness to heal to other cosmos. And shout out to Jimmie and to the rest of the panelists. To everybody tuning in. Peace. I come as Corey, as Hala, as my ancestors, and special shout out to the sisters in the video for speaking their truth. And my son told me to say that when we thinking about Black liberation, it means including all of our intersections, our elderness, our young boy girlness, our queerness, our non-gender conformingness, our streetness, our woman and manness. And I think, I think that the simple answer is definitely yes. And I think Q really hit on some really important things, talking about rap, hip hop, industry, capitalism, and the intersection of racism and sexism in the hip hop culture. Especially thinking about how hip hop came from community people struggling and organizing and trying to build community knowledge and community education, local, what we would call, particularly a lot of young men trying to build peace. And then when you think about how we get wrapped up into a system of capitalism and who runs it, and how the system is designed with intersections of sexism built up into it. And when we see the video with Russell, I think it's important to name that. And I think it's also important to kind of push beyond Russell too, as we hold this space here and think about how does Black men get mapped? And how does it land on Black women in our Black family? Because all of this is like the Black community has to hold another burden. We have to figure out how to hold each other accountable, how to struggle, how to love with each other while we wrapped up in another system that's, I think, causing more harm to our whole community. The other thing I would like to say real quick about that, and just bringing Hala and our legacy in, and thinking about this question and the work we do, we really think about all forms of the violence that we experiencing today, but particularly gender-based violence as part of a larger system of violence. you know, and really understanding that it works in our interpersonal relationships, it works in our, and definitely in our institutions, but it's coming from a larger understanding of what we call with history. We talk about how Black people, particularly indigenous people, were moved from African culture, African worldview, and really shift into enslavement and colonization, which is a Eurocentric, patriarchal, cultural, and worldview. So when we think about this historical attack of the war of our whole of Black people being moved into a patriarchal kind of system and a patriarchal kind of worldview, and then we live in institutions since the 13th Amendment, particularly here in this context here in Turtle Island, where we've been developing these things, our schools, our churches, our healthcare systems, and then you put people in generational poverty. And I end by saying, when I was growing up in my neighborhoods, you know, in the 80s, you know, after experiencing this, after decade, generation after generation, my family's experiencing this kind of separation from African culture, African matriarchy, where we understand how, where we build and how we teach, how we hold down family, how we respect each other, and being wrapped up into this. I didn't know, you know, there's a lot of things I didn't know. It's a lot of things that's not being taught in our neighborhoods, how to grow our women, how to honor our mothers, how to honor our sisters, even how to respect other men, and how to love our fathers, because our fathers is not there like that. So when you got people in this war, historically, and then we in communities that are structurally not getting our culture, and we being attacked by police brutality, attacked by other forms of systems. And then the last thing I end up by saying is, not only are women, our Black women, holding this in the jobs, they holding this in our homes. And I wouldn't even say Black women, I would say young people in our families. A lot of people in our families get touched, and we don't talk about our families. And it ain't just Black women. It's also, you know, young kids, young indigenous boys and girls and non-gender conforming people in our family who are impacted by this war, our cousins, our uncles, our brothers, they touch us, and we don't say nothing in that either. So it's not just the industry. And I would say that is a larger impact of how we are in this, figure it out amongst ourselves. So I love to talk more about just how we figure some of that out, but I want to bring some of that into the space, man. Thank you.
As always, you bring the wisdom in the conversation. I appreciate you, brother. Thank you so much, Corey, for that. Corey, you raised a couple of issues, which I want to address because you raised them. I do want to come back to some of the things in the film directly, but I want to address, you know, I mean, of course, all the brothers are welcome and invited to jump in. But I want to, you know, you raised some things, Corey, that I want to focus on, highlight in a moment, particularly for Brother Serrano, as well as Quazzy. And I want to, you know, Brother Serrano, I want to start with you and your work, working with youth and young boys. What role, from your experience, does trauma play in impacting how masculinity, how manhood is presented, how it's developed in the communities in which you're working with young men and boys?
Thank you. Thank y'all for having me on here. First of all, thank you to everybody on this call. I would say trauma plays a big fact, especially like generational trauma. I think trauma is like, it's hard because in some people it's hard for you to actually figure out that that's what you're actually sitting with and that's what you're dealing with. It's like trauma from your past or trauma that you're dealing with right now. So it's almost like it's extremely hurtful because first, trauma is something that like most people sadly don't become aware of. The way they're treating people, the way they act, you know, how they're using their dominance on other people. They don't really like access what trauma is doing to them. And then once you access what that trauma is, you have to actually do the work like yourself of healing. And I think that's like very important too. But I think trauma is deeply important, and you can see it like in our young youth. You can see trauma just prevailing in their everyday lives. So that's why I always think about just that role of healing to be in our lives, because it's really, really important for us to have these avenues of healing, whether it's Tai Chi, whether it's breathing, working out, hobbies, basketball, things you like, things you love, crying, talking about your emotions. I think trauma really does play a big fact, because most of us will take the trauma and just give it to someone else, or kind of perpetrate that onto someone else, but are actually like us do, like most of us don't do the internal work, and trauma becomes like an ongoing thing, like it becomes a snowball effect. So I always look at trauma as something that we have to actually like dig deep into, especially as men. I think we're probably the last of people to actually dive into our actual trauma, what that means to us, like how it makes us feel, even on days where we're not necessarily thinking about it. Because I always see trauma as like something that sometimes it'll take hold of you, you know, without you necessarily having a part in it, whether you're understanding that it's maybe your generational trauma, or it's trauma that you got from like your parents, or maybe it's trauma that you got from not having a dad around. But you'll definitely see it, like you see it in behaviors as well. Like I always say, I've rarely or never seen a youth that has both parents with love, that has the support, that had the financial resources, that had the friends, the family, and you know, the gatherings kind of edge towards violence or edge towards anything that's other than healthy. I always say those are the main aspects, is to have the parents in the home, the love. So I think trauma is really, really deep. It plays a big damaging role, especially with our youth. That's why I work with them closely, just to talk like honestly about what it means for me, what it means for them, and what it means like for healing. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that response, especially based on your frontline work with boys. I mean, all of you are working with boys and men, but I appreciate your insights, Serrano. Brother Quazzy, I want to go to you, because this really speaks to the heart of your work. You know, what Serrano just spoke about, often when our society, the American society, thinks about wellness, mindfulness, and meditation, I think the image for popularly conjured that comes to mind for many people is a whiteness. You know, we don't think about this country, the rituals, the cultural rituals and traditions within communities of color around healing, around reconciliation, around restoration. And I'd be curious from your perspective, Quazzy, what are the ways that you think that the Black community has been kept away from holistic healing, or away from wellness opportunities?
I think we've been kept away in not so subtle ways, as well as the subtle ways. You see it in like everything else that we do. It's always something slick, you know. It's always this little thing that you can't quite put your finger on it, but you know it's not for you. You know you're not welcome. It takes a lot for a person to enter a space that they don't feel comfortable in, and especially so, you know, when you're led to believe like the majority of your space is white, even if you live in a Black community, you know, outside of that section of the community, you feel like, you know, anything that's of value in some way is in a white space. It's like a shadow, and that's what came to me even when I'm hearing Serrano talk about trauma. We see it in the young boys, and we see it in the men, you know, that we work with. It's like a shadow trauma, and it's almost there mocking you. It's infused in your everyday life, like every breath you take. Like it's just you can't help but get the trauma is there, you know. And the ill thing is, like, we then harm people in our community, our families, like Corey was saying, and we don't actually lose the trauma by transferring it. You know, we just make more trauma, and then it's just eating itself up, and it becomes this monster that we can't even get our head around. When it comes to like the wellness space, you know, I think a lot of that, if you go in the wellness space, you're asked to be in a vulnerable position. And I think a lot of us are not used to being in a vulnerable position, and also equating vulnerability and safety as the same thing. Usually a vulnerable position for a lot of people that we work with, and I think a lot of the other brothers work with too, it's a not safe situation if you're vulnerable. And that's exactly what we ask of people in those wellness spaces. I feel my big, I think, goal really with all of it would be for us to heal the trauma so we could get out of the space of healing. Because a lot of times when we're talking to the brothers, you know, the people that come to the certain events that I've been a part of, they already are moving in a certain direction, and that's beautiful, you know. And they're aware that there's trauma, and they're aware that there needs to be healing. But to me, that's only just the start. Because if you can be aware that there's trauma, and you can be aware that you need healing, but you might not necessarily know how to get past that step. I was talking to some brothers today, asked them how they was feeling. They said, you know, they're not feeling good, but they don't know what else they got. They got work, they got kids, they got all these people that are not trying to hear it from their perspective, you know, and that's the worst feeling, I think, as a man, feeling like you got an issue and don't nobody want to hear it from you. And you like, this is a real issue though. Like I can't even get really fully to the next step, but I'll do it anyway. You know what I'm saying? I'll push past it. But that's why I feel like, you know, when I was hearing with Serrano talk, it's like, yeah, it's almost like the trauma can mock and speak up, but it knows you can't. It's like a gaslighting thing, but it's in your own body, it's your own mind. It's really you versus you, at least how it feels like. But I think the more we can get these people that aren't used to being in spaces that feel safe, feel comfortable, then it's gonna open up everything. And I really don't think it's gonna take a lot. I think it just needs to take that powerful first step. So that's a lot of what we're doing here, right? We're bringing them that information back to people who ain't gonna be on this call. You know what I mean? Like it's mad people that need to hear this that ain't gonna be on this call. Wouldn't even think to be on this call. But hopefully for the people that's listening, they know those people and you can just drop a little bit of game on them here and there as we go.
Thank you so much for that. I want to go back to the film, if your brothers don't mind, but the film specifically on the record, and then come back to the respective work each of you were doing through your organizations, through your, through your presence in the world, and how you're elevating solutions to the challenges that we're percolating here. But also really, and I think Corey framed us to this well for this, really contextualizing this work within these systems that we exist. Patriarchy, colonialism, racism, genocide, and to be sure, and Corey and Quentin highlighted this, but the issues that we're talking about here specifically are within the Black community, but our Latino brothers, our Indigenous brothers, other brothers within other communities of color are also facing similar challenges. So I just want to acknowledge that these struggles are shared with other communities. In the film on the record, hip hop, the currents of hip hop run throughout the film. The hip hop culture, I think we can all recognize is portrayed in the film on the record as having contributed to allowing or the condoning the acceptance of violence and harassment of Black women. And I would love to, whoever wants to take this question, speak to the role of hip hop culture in the condoning or acceptance or encouragement of violence, physical or otherwise, against Black women and Latino women. But also, the film on the record is of a particular time period in which the alleged abuses, of Russell Simmons and others are discussed. Has hip hop culture changed? In the decades, the decades since. But I love, whoever wants to start us off, speak to hip hop, the culture of hip hop, its role, if it has a role. If you don't think it has a role, please say that. But the role of hip hop and the silencing of Black Latino women in the community, as well as the condoning of violence.
I'll take a chop at that first, Jimmie. I think hip hop culture is not like, when we talk about culture, we're not talking about only the great parts of our history and our way of living. We're talking about the whole complexity of it, the contradiction in it, the hypocritical nature of it as well. So I would say, within hip hop culture exists, and it's also Black culture, it's also Latino culture, it's also Indigenous culture, it's African culture, you know what I'm saying? Because at the heart of hip hop, there's a drum, and the drum is universal, right? So we're making beats, and we're telling our stories, we're storytellers, and that's the beautiful part about hip hop and rap and that music. But I think also with that's within the hip hop culture is also rape culture, right? It exists, it thrives inside of that. Sexual assault, misogyny, in particular Black women, misogynoir, You know what I'm saying? And it's also a blaming culture, right? And I just want to preface this too, that it's not just about hip hop. All forms of music, all forms of culture profit off of demise and the subjugation of women, right? Violence against women and violence against Black women in particular is very profitable. You know, not just in this financial way that the hip hop industry benefits off of Black life and Black culture and co-opting indigenous forms of everything, right? So it's also about building this false sense of esteem and value and worth, right? And a lot of times, you know, there's a negotiation where, you know, Black men are, you know, thriving and being successful at the cost of women, right? And that's what we need to kind of transform in the culture. And that exists, that still exists, right? The roles that we play, you know, this binary way of looking at men and women and so many identities and experiences are missing from that, of course. But this idea that I have to be at the cost of someone else, and not even just women, you know, like when you think about male violence, it impacts men more than it impacts women. Almost 3-to-1 studies have shown. But the idea that, you know, women, no matter what type of music it may be, you know, even from the conscious to the gangster to the trap, whatever it is, there's always an element of, let me get my credibility by downgrading or objectifying or making women and girls property, particularly Black girls and Black women. So that's something that we have to look at. And culture evolves, right? And so there's so much room and space to evolve this idea of you know, hip hop culture into the trauma pieces that the brothers have been talking about. That's real, right? And you know, and trauma impacts the way we view the world, the decisions that we make, the language that we use, the behavior that we have, the way we think about women and girls and think about ourselves as Black men. Trauma impacts all of that, right? And it's intergenerational, like, you know, Serrano mentioned, but then the other pieces that exist in the culture as well. And what hip hop does, hip hop is healing. You know, arts activism is a healing piece. We got to look at the resiliency that we can also pass down generationally in music as that form of doing so, and thus the culture. But it's the industry, hip hop industry. You know, Kevin Powell speaks to this. Byron Hurt speaks to this in his films. You know, hip hop industry is the thing that's destroying all of us, Black men and Black women, and it's also pitting us against each other when we are sharing this planet, and we need to kind of figure that out.
I'd love to piggyback on what Q was saying. We did a live Black Men's Blueprint with Daniel Oyenloye of Dance Sun Creatives, and it was real interesting to hear what he's talking about. Just a brief background on him. He works with the youth, and they specifically work with music, and he's helping, you know, young men get their mixtapes together, their rap mixtapes. What came up though is he's happy that people are able to express themselves. This is the first time that these young boys and men are able to do something maybe productive with their time, with their art, but the art itself is still wrapped up in misogyny. So, you know, I think it's a question of like, how do we like applaud people for doing things productive, and you don't want to, you know, stop anybody's creativity, but also like kind of like point out like, homie, this is not the message, that it's not really the direction we're trying to go with it. Like, it's good that you're being creative and, you know, you're doing something with your time, but it's still like he was saying, it's still wrapped up in the misogyny. It's still, you know, finding that line of encouraging the youth, but also guiding them, I think is a very interesting task to take on.
Thank you, Glenn Quazzy, for that response. One of the things, you know, the film really elevated, throughout, is something in which when I saw the film, I confess I did not know of this theory at the time, but I've since learned about it and actually had the opportunity to get to know and speak with the author of it. Dr. Jennifer Gomez, who is a professor at Wayne State University, now on fellowship at Stanford University, has been recognized as pioneering a theory called cultural betrayal trauma theory. And the roots of this theory, for those who may not be familiar with it, posit that some ethnic minorities develop what she calls intercultural trust, love, loyalty, attachment, connection, responsibility, and solidarity within the community, protect the community, to protect people within the community from a hostile society, a hostile mainstream society. Within the context of group violence, such as a black male harming a black woman, violates this intercultural trust, as Dr. Gomez posits. And she says this violation is called cultural betrayal. And I want to introduce this theory of Dr. Gomez's and kind of put it out there for you all to chop up, because one of the things that struck me and Drew and Salai and others on the records really speak to, what was not named, is this idea of cultural betrayal trauma theory. In other words, that Black people, Black women in this case, believe or indoctrinated or led to, or really ingrained to believe that if counterparts within the community commit acts of violence against them, that's not only cultural betrayal trauma, but that the community penalizes them for stepping forward. And I'd love to just hear a reflection, a response to this theory of Dr. Gomez. I'll put a link to it in the chat as well for the panelists and for our audience members to explore further.
I'll just say something really quick on that. I think it's it's this idea of what snitching means, right? A lot of it is connected to this idea that if you snitch on a particular part of the culture, then there's some consequences. In different circles, we call that betrayal. When you approach someone who has violated, a whisper in the air, right? Where brothers will approach. In this case, brothers will approach someone who has done harm to other women. I've been in situations where we approach that brother and get a whisper in the air, no matter whatever that can mean to you. It was a way of dealing with that conflict. But I would say this, right? And I think it's in my work at Connect, in the work around intimate partner violence and domestic violence too, particularly when that happens in our own communities, right? In our relationships with systems is very problematic because of, based on your gender, your race, your orientation, all those things are factors in terms of getting justice and accountability from a system. But when we're talking about within our own culture, in our groups, in our communities, until there's a mechanism that really exists inside of our culture where we can hold each other accountable, where we can not throw anybody away. That's why restorative justice and transformative justice is a viable means of potentially dealing with internal betrayals and when we're doing harm to each other. I think we have to develop a way where we can truly hold each other accountable, and that there's also an acknowledgement that harm has been done, that there's some form of repair and reparations, and that is driven by the person or the people who are harmed or impacted the most by the violence or the harm that has been done. So we need to have, for cultural betrayal to exist in a healthy way, we really need to have a sense of accountability and the systems of that we are watching each other, holding each other accountable, helping each other when we are harmed and traumatized. So I think I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So, and I'm sure other brothers have stuff to say on that.
Not to put you on blast, Corey, I'd love to get your reflection on this. I mean, one of the things I love about Hala, and the work you're doing, Corey, is that you're not just working with boys and young men, but also how you really head on. You have really pushed Hala to confront these challenging intra-community issues. I'm just curious, Corey, like how do you, within the framework of Hala, how do you address this idea that Dr. Gomez has percolated of cultural betrayal trauma, and how do you introduce the notion of healing?
Nah, that's a good question. I was just, I'm always, I don't know the work right here, but I'm always, quizzy of, my non-traditional, my grassroots, my Black liberation lens. Always tell me to be query of the academia, even if it's your people's, because the academia is history, comes off the back of colonization and enslavement. Harvard, all of the prestigious universities, they come off the back of taking African and indigenous people's humanity and knowledge. So I don't really, I have to look at it a little bit more, but I think to answer the question a little bit, I think we understand that, like I said earlier, that we've been hit with historical trauma, that we've been hurt from enslavement and colonization, been moved from lands, been snatched from resources, lost a lot of families, been miseducated, uneducated, killed. And then we've been put into institutions that don't serve us, for generations. So that creates an institutional historical trauma that's persistent because it keeps going on. So when we think about healing, it's a journey, it's a struggle. First, we thinking about Nat Turner, we thinking about Harriet Tubman, we thinking about Ida B. Wells, we thinking about Ella Baker, Assata Shakur. We thinking about how you got to fight, because if you're going to try to love your family and trying to heal, you're going to need to know how to meditate. You might need to know how to box. You might need to know how to hold a circle. You might need to know how to do time in prison. You might need to know how to cook some food on a Sunday to bring people together. So I think at Holla, we really do grassroots organizing. We do it in the context of organizing. We think organizing, but we think it's the systems that take our wellness, the systems that take our trauma, that keeps it in our conditions, in our relationships, in our cosmology. So while we doing our individual work, we got to meditate. So we do study. We study Black Women's Blueprint. We study the works of Khalid Muhammad. You know what I'm saying? And we study the works of Malcolm X. We working with Malcolm X partner, Betty Shabazz. We study Malcolm's older sister. We study the works of the people that took care of the people that take care of us. And we think about our grandmoms, our moms, who've been impacted by crack, who've been single mothers, and who still got us here. And then as we was in prison, and we was coming in contact with our elders in prison who was already organizing, and we was reflecting, we started doing our own meditation, our own healing, our own reflecting on how we got to be better, and how that starts with us being better to our family and our moms, our wives, our children. And then I think we was able to keep growing from the prison organizing, and the legacy that we come from, to keep building curriculum and to keep studying. And I think what we start to understand, just thinking about Dr. Francis Cress Westland, that there's a historical fight that we in, there's a structural fight that we in, there's an interpersonal fight that we in, and there's a personal fight. And all of those things is going on at the same time. So how do we do youth development? How do we do family development that's intersectional, that's intergenerational? And that's about struggle. How you have hard, because sometimes it's having hard conversations. We just had a circle right now. I'm right here with my young people right now. And we just came from a circle talking about what the year was like and what it means to be, what was our shortcomings, how we hurt each other throughout the year, how we wish we would have been better for each other. So I don't think it's an answer to it. I think it's about studying, it's about loving. I think the struggle comes from the love, and the struggle coming from understanding how much you love your people. And it's about journeying, because we're not perfect and we've been hurt. It's not about because I might say something, I might do something, because I ain't got it all right now. I got a lot more than I had when I was 15. I got a lot more than yesterday, but I still need to build with some people. I still need to go through some struggles. I think sometimes we ain't got enough capacity to struggle with each other. We think, just because you see me on this panel, you might think I got it, but I'm still in the journey. But it's the love that you want to feel around me, that you could see that that I could go somewhere else. I could go somewhere else with you. And that's the same thing I bring to people. It's not like I'm trying to beat you up. I'm trying to love so we can go somewhere else. you know? So I think that's more, we got to create that love. And sometimes we've been so hurt, and definitely our Black women, our mothers, that like, they ain't got space to love like some of the stuff that we be doing, because they just taking a lot. And I think that's why it's important for like places like Holla, which is mostly male body centered, even though our leadership is queer with Mashley, and so many of our young people is in our leadership that is, you know, but we sent it as a, I think it's really important that we let our moms and our mothers and our girls know that we ain't perfect, but that y'all are our matriarchy, and that our leadership comes through that vein. We journeying to figure out what that means with you. Because I think they don't stand in a matriarchy all the way, you know, these days too. And I think that's part of our role in helping them stand in a matriarchy as well. So I think just being a father, I do this work as a program, but everybody see me as a father. You know, my son is queer. So he been queer like his whole life. So you see me ragged up, coming from the streets, all of this, and you can just see my program, Holla, the people that build with, they see me kicking it with my son. You know, they see me loving my son. You know, they see me vibing with my son. So, you know, my sister, you know, came out my mom's womb is queer, you know, and they see me loving my sister. They see me vibing with my sister. And they see me struggling with them too. So they know that it's not like I'm perfect with that. It's love that's in emotion. So I think that's also how we do it at Healing. We bring our life into the young people's lives and be examples for them. And we don't always be the best example of perfectness, but we be the example of journeying and trying to keep growing in certain principles we stand on.
Corey, that's a fact. Like what you were saying, like that really hit home. And I think that's so important for like the work we all do is the transparency, you know, because like I grew up in the church, and like a big reason that people stay away from the church is the hypocrisy, you know. And we could be on the panel and it's all good, but like we going through all the same stuff that we trying to help you. It's more probably for us than even them at times. At least that's how I feel a lot of times. Like this is so I can get right, you know, and like hopefully it touches some of the people as well. And even some Corey, what you saying earlier, like way earlier about, you know, us being so far removed from our African lineage is just so much we don't know. It got me even thinking about the question the doctor had. You know, it's just like I've heard a lot of women say that they've had harm done by members of their family. And when they go to their aunts about it, or they go to their mom about it, their mom tell them to push it under the table. You know, don't tell your business, this, that, and the third. And on some ways, it's angering to me that, you know, an adult, you know, when a child's coming to adult seeking help, that they don't help. But at the same time, it's just like, you know, how you expecting people to do something they never seen before? You know, they never seen nobody stand up for them. They went through the same exact thing, probably with the same relative, which makes it even that much crazier. And they never had nobody standing up for them. So they don't even know how to stand up for the people that they got to stand up for. So, I mean, it's all wrapped up. And like you said, we need everybody. We need like the people who can meditate, the people that can box, the people that went to jail, the people that went to college. You really need everybody. And then you need the transparency on top of that, because nobody wants to be feeling like they're talking to someone who is like here and ain't there, you know. It's rather a spectrum, you know, like, and we can oscillate. We can go, we was here yesterday, then something happens, and it's a constant cycling. And that's why I think the healing doesn't stop. Hopefully it gets to a point where we heal and we can grow and build on it. But you gotta be courageous, you know. You gotta do something that nobody in your community has done before, so that they can be like, oh, this is okay. I can embrace this person, whether they be queer or whether they be a woman that you actually I can actually stick up for. Yeah, you can. Like, you can actually let your child not have to hug your relatives if they don't want to. And even if they don't have, without even having to have too much discourse around it, you can do that. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what the big part is, the awareness. Once you're aware of what's going on, then you got the accountability, because you can't never unlearn what you learn. And then after that, you got the accountability that you got to take that jump and take action. You know what I'm saying? Because otherwise it's just like, why have the knowledge if you don't apply it? For real. So yeah, facts. I felt that.
Thank you so much, Quazzy. I appreciate your voice in that thread. A couple of things. First of all, I just want to signal we have half an hour left. I want to invite our audience members, our sisters and brothers in the audience, to, you know, continue percolating your thoughts, your comments, and questions as well in the chat. I want to, which other brothers here have done, I've yet to do so, just acknowledge our sisters at Black Women's Blueprint. Jazz, Farah, Savannah, thank you so much for the invitation to be a part of this. Honor you for your work and honor you for convening this discussion. My longtime sister and colleague, ally, Bania Banza, Kathleen Rogers, want to honor you for your work, your camaraderie, your allyship, and just resonant, authentic connection in the work. I want to elevate something which we haven't really addressed full on yet, which is this idea of masculinity and manhood and healthy, what's healthy and toxic. I'm going to go to Brother Serrano first, and then I want Q, if you can follow through the lens of what the work you're doing here in New York City through Connect. I'm thinking back to a conversation I had as part of another panel a year ago in January 2020 at the Sundance Film Festival, pre-COVID-19. Sister Joan Morgan, said something which I've been long carrying. Those of you know Joan Morgan, longtime hip hop activist, writer, journalist, powerful, fierce thought leader in the work of building culture and addressing trauma. And Joan Morgan talked about how in so many ways, Black men in this country, men of color in this country, have really been compelled, or I'll use the word indoctrinated, into growing into an archetype of manhood, which is not ours authentically. In other words, we're presented with an archetype of manhood that, frankly speaking, is an archetype of white manhood masculinity. If you want to be a man, be a man like white men be a man, in this culture, especially, and I would say even globally in many places. We know, I think the brothers in this call and brothers and sisters on the audience know, for a lot of reasons, their manhood doesn't work for us on many levels. And so, Serrano, I want to go to you, Brother Serrano, and then ask you to jump into the lens of Connect NYC. In your work, Serrano, how do you define and how do you talk about healthy masculinity and manhood in the young men and boys with whom you work?
Thank you. So first, I think for me, I talk about it like honestly, because for me, like healthy masculinity or healthiness in general is like being able to be vulnerable, having like open conversations, like being accountable to yourself and to others around you, like being able to take a step back, knowing like not that your value is not the most valuable thing in the room, understanding that everybody else in your life and in your room has value. I think being healthy is like taking that step back. It's like being aware and also being like emotionally expressive. And for me, I'm very honest, like with the youth. I work with youth that are 8 to 12. So for those who think that like they're a lot older, sometimes it's harder because they're a lot younger, but that's who I am. I actually choose to be honest, like, and just because I feel like that's what we need to be with our youth. I feel like we say that youth are the future, but we say it in a cliche way. We say it and then we just kind of like don't do shit to actually like help them develop and help them actually learn. Like, so I'm the type of person that would be like, youth are actually our future, and I will do things to make that seem true. So when I work with youth, daily, we actually do what is called like an emotion chart. And it's very, very dope. And it's because I understood that like youth, everybody's on their phone now, right? From 5 to 10 to 15, everybody's got a phone, emojis here and there. So for me, it was about how to meet that youth where they're at. So every day, even yesterday when I met with the youth, we start off with like an emoji chart. It's got like 20 to 30 like emojis. And we always start with the day of like how you're feeling. For those who are new to our group, we'll tell them 2 things. One, it's okay to have an emotion that's not positive. I think that's one of the things that contributes to our very, very, very toxic masculinity. It's lying about how we feel. It's very toxic. I always tell the youth, even if you're not feeling positive, that's you being honest about yourself. So that way you know how to navigate yourself and the people around, and you know how to navigate your life with the people around you. So we do that literally every day. And the other part that I tell them is that it's okay to have more than one emotion. Like for example, tomorrow I'm going to a funeral to support a friend. So I'm a little hurt right now, but I'm also like very, very excited to be here with y'all. And I'm like thrilled to just be here. So that's just me showing that you can have dual like emotions at the same time. And I think modeling is a big thing as well that I love for the youth, because we can always just talk about like how to talk to the youth and throw things at them. But modeling comes into play too. So me modeling what it means to be like a healthy human being, like there's people around me to share ideas, not step on anybody's toes, not make myself feel like I'm more important than anybody in the room, especially somebody who's women identified and a Black woman at that. It's also like modeling that I can be wrong. I'll tell the youth right then in their face, like, hey, no, you're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm wrong. Don't ever let me tell you that, you know, I'm right when I'm not. It's giving them that leadership too. So I just wanted to share a little quick story because this is like my first week. I've been doing this for 4 to 5 years now, but this was like my first week with the youth. And it means a lot to me because the story just sticks in my mind like forever. So we're about a week into my actual job, me doing like groups with youth in the schools. And within the first week of our groups, we're actually like making rules, you know, because this is the youth group. So we let them choose the rules, and then we all get to live up by them together. You know, I always found that it's easier to let the youth choose the rules, and then they get to, you know, it's easy for them to abide by it. So we're taking rules here and there, like, hey, don't be disrespectful, have fun, this, that. And one of these youth were like, in here, like, we can't cry, because he was like, boys group. He was probably thinking like boys group, tough as shit, chest out, you know, the whole 9. And me physically, I stand at like 5'11". I have like 12 to 13 tattoos. I work out. I play basketball. So I'm physically fit, like, in person. So I asked that youth, I was like, do you mind if I comment on what you just said? And he was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I was like, not when I like get hurt physically, I don't know why, but I was like, when I get hurt emotionally, I actually do cry. I'm like, it actually helps me like shed the negative emotions and the negative toxins to the way I can actually feel better. And it helps me actually connect with how I'm truly feeling in the moment. It literally just went quiet for like 3 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds. And out of sure nowhere, like, that youth, he just stood up and was like, that's because real men cry. And I like gave him a high five. And then out of nowhere, all the kids like got up. So I was like high fiving, like I was Oprah giving everybody a high five. But for me, what was more important? At the time, I was 21, 22. So for me, it was more important that they looked up to me, and to show that vulnerability in time was more important than for me to be tough or for me to be whatever the fuck manly is called nowadays in these conditions. For me, it was noticing that these youth are going to look up to me regardless, just because I'm older, I'm bigger. So I have to be mindful of that, and I want to be positive. Because we get to choose, right? When somebody's looking at you, when somebody's following you, when somebody's looking for guidance in you, it's ultimately your choice into what you're teaching them, into what they're learning. So for me, that was really, really important. Is to just be open with them, like very, very vulnerable. Like, you can cry here, and then you'll see it play out. Like, they'll tell each other, like, hey, it's okay to let go and to be you. So for me, healthy is being vulnerable, being open, being honest. When I work with youth, I'm doing all those things because I want them to know that that's actually like healthy as a human. You know, humans have emotions and humans feel things, but as men, we just feel anger, right? We're just taught to feel anger. When in our reality, out of 99% of the time, there's something under that anger that we don't want to talk about, that we don't access. Maybe I'm actually hurt, but I'm gonna display this in anger and punch somebody. Maybe I'm actually sad or insecure, but I'm gonna display this in a way where I feel good or I feel dominant. So for me, healthy is literally finding who you are, that identity piece, not being afraid, because I could have took the high route of like, yep, you're right. Don't cry in here. Don't let me catch you doing it. That's not what we do. But I was like, no, like, I have to do like ultimately what I feel is right, whether somebody's standing with me or not. And even that is my definition of like being healthy. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Serrano. You know, I just underscore a lot of what Serrano said. And I think that, you know, masculinity gets a bad rap. And I say that only because, you know, the only conversation we're having about masculinity right now is of toxic masculinity, you know, and that's like the latest term. We talked about it as hyper, super masculinity in the past. But I think that the reality about masculinity is that there's different types, there's masculinities, right? And I think we experience that in many of them all throughout the day, right? If we're at home and the home is safe, you know, I could take that toxic hyper mask off and I could put a more of a feminine, more true to who we really are as people. You know, if I'm safe, I don't have to put on this mask or this kind of front. And a lot of times we have to kind of recognize that toxic masculinity is also a response. It's a self-defense to other forms of masculinity and experiences that we have, even in our own neighborhoods, you know, even in our own homes, our response to police, our response to folks who may be, doing harm to us in multiple ways. And also toxic masculinity is also a sign of trauma as well for some people. It's not a one size fits everybody, but I just think about, me growing up, and I was born in the Bronx, and I was, I'm a product of New York City in all different parts of life. And I would say that, I remember, being raised by a single mom, raising two Black boys in New York City, right? And experiencing and witnessing, the racism and the sexism that my mom had to experience and trying to bust her ass to raise these two Black boys so we get home at the end of the day. So I just think about, and what me and my brother had to kind of live up to help my mom out, right? So, and what we had to kind of navigate to get to school, what we had to navigate to get home at the end of the day, and everything in between. So a lot of times, our masculinity was about other men, right? How are we matching up and how are we fitting in to other men and other groups that, not necessarily doing us harm, but are also experiencing, this idea that we need to be tough, we need to be strong, and that vulnerability is a weakness. And what we've been doing, and some of the brothers on this call have been, and you have been too, Jimmie, it's like through our men's roundtables, creating these spaces where we could truly be vulnerable and live out those other forms of emotions that are okay to express, as is anger and outrage, because as a manifestation of what we're experiencing. But that's not the only thing that's safe for, male identified folks to experience, right? The joy, the pain. I remember real quickly doing this exercise with young people in a high school, and we wrote down all the different forms of emotions on a piece of paper, and we ripped them up and had the young people pick out an emotion, and without using words, they had to act out what the emotion was. And like every single emotion we put down in a variety of like up to 20. So when these young men picked up the piece of paper, everything that they acted out looked like anger, right? So now, and I was like, and that actually hurt me because we don't know how to express it. And also we're not allowed to, because there's an expectation that we cannot be vulnerable, we cannot be emotional, when anger and doing harm and violence to somebody is the highest form of emotionality, you know what I mean? So I think we have to kind of really make vulnerability a safe thing to do, right? That you can express these things, just like Serrano said, and break that down and talk about that. And, us as, older than some of the younger people that we work with, to, yes, model that, be an example to them that it's okay to express these things. And, and I just think about like, mental health and mental wellness and being whole, right? So what we've always done this, but in particularly during COVID, when COVID has challenged, and hopefully it's challenged us in a good way to be better men, to be different on the other side of this, to challenge typical norms of masculinity and how we ought to be men in relationships and fathers to our children, to challenge all of those things, was to really ask this question and really mean it and be able to respond like, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What's going on with you? How can I be of assistance to you? Because a lot of times we ask that question and we really don't want to, we don't even listen to the answer, let alone say, I'm there for you. I can be a resource to you. I'll go with you to get to a doctor. I'll go with you to get counseling, and multiple forms of counseling. I'm not just talking about the traditional, psychiatrists, psychologists. There's multiple indigenous ways for us to kind of get the help that we need through our peers and our communities, and really tapping into that. So I think masculinity is it's a range. We get caught up in one type, and I think that's problematic. And then we also got to look at hyper-toxic masculinity as a cry for help, and also a self-defense to other forms of things that are happening around us.
Thank you. Appreciate the insight. I want to just, first of all, again, time check. We have 15 minutes left in our conversation. But Corey, you raised something, I think fundamental in this conversation, this work of healing and transformation within the Black community in particular, and that's the intergenerational aspect. I mean, I know we know each other for a while. I know you and your work at Hala. I'd love for you to kind of share, briefly share some insight into how Hala really kind of, I would say, navigates the intergenerational divide, intergenerational journey. I won't say divide, intergenerational journey. You work with young people, you work with older adults. How does Hala, what approaches does Hala use to, hold the same conversation with those generations, but also to address systemic issues? I mean, we've heard a lot, especially in the context of Black Lives Matter, the movement. The way young folks are doing it now is somewhat different than the way they did it back in the day, the 60s and 70s. So I'm just curious, how does Hala, navigate the generational spectrum in its work?
Nah, thank you for that question, man. Shout out to Hala. Shout out to Baba Sekou Odinga, who's one of the Black Liberation Army soldiers and a person accused of freeing Assata Shakur. We were just talking to Baba Sekou yesterday. And I say that to say that Hala, we started in prison, in New York prison, and it was developed by people that was connected to people who was in prison since the 60s and the 70s, who's part of the Attica Rebellion, who's part of the Young Lords, the Black Panthers, the Black Liberation Army. So a lot of our work is centered in the African and Latino and indigenous framework that come from grassroots organizers in New York. So I think our pedagogy, our curriculum is already honoring our elders and our ancestors. And I think that's an African and indigenous kind of like understanding of teaching. So we believe that our best teachings, our best lessons actually come from our mothers, our grandmothers, the people that got us here. So our curriculum, our relationship, and our experiences come from our experiences of being in the neighborhoods that experience a lot of structural historical violence, being in prisons, being in schools, and then connecting to the people in those neighborhoods who came before us, who came up with solutions, who came up with ways to fight. And I think a part of that healing justice, just thinking about our sister, Kara Page, and Dr. Jen Wright, and so many of us nationally that do healing justice. Healing justice is a framework within prison abolition, deeply connected to feminism and intersectionality and Black women, really reminding us that healing is always part of who we are. That you can't do Black, you can't do indigenous, you can't do that without ancestors, without healing. You can't do education, you can't do nothing without healing. So when we think about organizing as our framework, and then we think about healing justice, what we got back from our sisters, particularly, Angela Davis, you think about Kara Page, but you think about so many sisters, Assata Shakur, so many sisters that were struggling in the movement that really help us think about transformative justice, that's really help us think about community accountability, but that, shout out to Black Women's Blueprint, that really help us think about how we lean into healing justice, how we get our family back. So when you got those kind of like elders and community inspirations, we really just lean on them. We learning from them. We get hope from them. We being vulnerable enough to try to come into the room, do some work before we get into the room. And we just trying to struggle from where we at. But we got curriculum. We come from campaigns. We know how to build campaigns. We know how to organize. We know how to teach. We used to smoke crack. We used to rob people. So we know how to heal people who smoke crack. We know how to heal people who rob people. So we put that into curriculum, into love, into pedagogy.
Thank you so much, Corey, for that. I've tried to put some links to the chat to folks who aren't as familiar with the organizations you all represent. I'll add in more in our final 10 minutes. I want to go to Brother Quazzy to talk more about the work of RRC and how the work of RRC is really, from your perspective, contributing to communities of color, especially the Black community, and addressing violence against women, as well as the traumas and pain of Black manhood.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely where we come from at RRC. Again, shout out to Black Women's Blueprint. Black Women's Blueprint created RRC, the Running River Collective. Really, to be honest, there was a need for I guess you work with young boys, and you know, by trade I had been doing a lot of meditations and mindfulness things anyway, and you know, it's kind of like a thing. Fair and Serrano was like, yo, it's time for you to come over here and really get it popping over here, and you know, so I owe them so much. Savannah being a teacher for me for over a couple decades, and then Farrah, such an impactful leader. I've learned a lot on how to lead and how to learn, and continue to grow with them as the teachers, as the guides. What I'm realizing with everybody, but also with kids, is that people need consistency. I feel like no matter what you're on, if you're consistent in that child's life, they're gonna rock with what you're on. So, you know, RSC, we look to be as consistent as we can and as accessible as we can. And really be as fearless as we can too. Be as fearless as like who else is taking their attention, and trying to really stay firm on what we're on, because I think the authenticity from wherever you come from, that always shines through. So that's what we look to do. And I don't remember who said it earlier, but just this idea that not always being the main person. Like, well, I'll point guard, I'll Magic Johnson it to who needs to have it. You know what I mean? Like if it's a Latinx group and we get called for it, I don't identify as Latinx. I'm gonna find who does. You know what I mean? Because we all got it. There's a spot for everybody in what we're doing, and then we trying to keep the diaspora like, you know, accurate. You feel me? So that's basically what we do. We try to bring in the people that are meant to do the thing that's as needed. And if nobody else gonna pull up, I'm gonna pull up. So if you're watching this, if you got it, if you on that type of time, like come holler at us, because we need a lot of different spectrums that I can't hold just as one person. But we have a lot of people, and there's a lot of people behind us, including Black Women's Blueprint. So forever shout out to them.
Thank you for the Quazzy. Just a time check for everyone. We have 5 minutes left. I'm gonna bring in Brother Serrano. And just, you know, I'll say this again before we close up, but just appreciate all you brothers for the insight, the personal sharing, and the lived experiences that you're offering up for the betterment of our community. Serrano, from your perspective, I mean, working with young men, boys, what can men do? I'm thinking specifically in our audience. What can men and women do in everyday life to help change the I say the social norms, you know, the social signals, if you will, Serrano, that allow for not only the objectification of women, but also I would say the stigmatization and criminalization of Black men and boys. What can we do? You know, coming out of this conversation, what can we just do in our everyday lives to change the predominant narrative?
Right. Thank you. So I was thinking first, what we can do is like kind of check that internal like trauma that we have. When I always think about like identity, I think about like a way of where I want to go. If I want to do something, if I want to heal, I gotta like actually do the work inside myself to feel like what's inside there. So I think for us generally, it's to look at inside us. Like I love what Quazzy said earlier about it's the you versus you, because it's very true. It's like the you versus all the things you don't want to be, all the things you do want to be, all the things you're afraid of, all the things you're not afraid of. So I think first what we have to do is kind of do that internal check of ourselves. So what am I actually dealing with? Like what arises to me when I'm feeling emotions or when I'm feeling things. I think also what we can do, first of all, is just believe women respectfully, like in general, and be there like to support them, like help create that actual, like help create and sustain actual safe spaces for women, being there to stand with them and not standing like in front of them. So by no means like speaking for them, but being that person to help echo the voice. So I think it's, other than that internal check for yourself, what we can do is ultimately believe the stories that we hear, and make the safe spaces like easier for women to actually come out and express these things, especially women of color. Because creating these spaces is what's going to actually help that conversation go smoothly. You know, when we think about the video and we think about how long it took these women to come up, is because there was no like safe spaces at all. You know, they were threatened to lose their jobs, you know, basically have it turned onto their own humanity. So I think for us, what we can do is to actually help create that space without us actually like taking up a lot of the space too, if that makes sense. Like create the space without taking up the space. So that's kind of some of the things that I was thinking about that we can actually do, is kind of hone into what our actual traumas are, what they mean for us, for the sisters around us, having them conversations with people who we actually are connected with as well. Because I have friends who, I think we all think about people who are not connected with and things that we can't do, but I have friends that I can talk to on a daily basis that maybe contribute to, to the violence to the violence that happens to women, or is very confused at their role in to helping women succeed. So I do that in my personal life, just talk to close friends and just be honest about like how we are as men and how we need to be. Because I say we, because we got to take that step back, whether you're like doing the good work, whether you're actually the person that's committing the harm, that we all collectively have to take that step back and be like, okay, what are we doing to actually help women, especially women of color, succeed? So that was my last piece about just finding someone that you connect with too. It doesn't have to be a home run right away. I think we look for those, but just these day by day instances where you're talking with people and that word gets out, and then more people, like, you'd be surprised how many of my friends like feel more comfortable now having like open conversations, and it like blows my mind. I'm like, I never like you thought you would get there, but the feeling still surprises you. So I would say definitely connecting with the other like men who are confused, curious, and willing to help do this work.
So much, Serrano. I'm going to do something moderators are supposed to do and pass it to one of my brothers in the panel to close us out. But first, I just want to thank, again, Farah, Savannah, Jazz, the Black Women's Movement team, Bonnie, Kathleen, our audience. Much love, much gratitude to you for joining us this evening. Q, you've been in this work for decades. I would love for you to close us out with a reflection or just, a thought about, of hope, or what gives you hope or inspiration for progress in this work? I mean, you've seen the journey. I'm just curious from your perspective, Q, through Connected Beyond, working in this country and internationally. What are the signs of progress that we can take to our heart as inspiration?
Great question, Jimmie. And and I think this panel exactly is the motivation and inspiration. Because when I started this work, you and I, Jimmie, you were Man Up in the International, and you could count on your hand how many Black men were doing this work. So I think the fact that Corey exists, Corey, we always kind of we peg Corey in to this box all the time, but Corey, he's been around paying his dues, doing this work for quite a long time, so he's not new to this. So I'll say that, but the fact that Corey exists in the way that his perspective in this work, the fact that Quazzy exists and bringing what he does to this work, and I want to shout out Quazzy and Running River Collective, because they're integral part in my men's roundtables now. You know what I mean? He does the healing, breathing, meditation work for us, and it's built in now. And that's important for our healing and our wholeness. And Brother Serrano, the fact that he exists, working with Brother Ed and Sarah out in Minnesota, you never even think that Minnesota was on the map in doing this work. And Duluth, Minnesota is like the center of intimate partner violence work, and work with men. And so like the fact that we have this panel and that we're doing it with Black Women's Blueprint, Farah and Savannah, who I both love and known for many, many, many years, and Jane Doe Films, the fact that we are allies and we're accomplices in this work, and that we are talking about, some very difficult topics and heroes that we grew up with in hip hop culture, right? And the course that it takes to even have that conversation. So I think just this panel and what this represents, and the fact that I can call out, probably a good 50 brothers now, when before in New York City, it was me and Ted Bunch in the beginnings of this work. But now there's a lot of Black men, and not just in the IPV field, because I think that's historically where we've been kind of pigeon-toed and narrow in the conversation, that this is a conversation of ultimately human beings, but about male attitudes and belief systems and the way we manifest ourselves, and being honest about that, and being vulnerable about the difficulties in this work, and the fact that we need to really, have the unusual alliances, men, women, straight, queer, adults and youth. And we even work with elders and learning and learning from their experiences around, being alive and learning from their successes and their challenges. So just the fact that we're on this panel tonight with these brothers and these sisters, I think that is the motivation. And I can't even imagine where we'll be in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now.
Thank you so much, Q, for closing us out. Kathleen, Bonnie, the BWB team, Jane Doe Films, HBO Max, thank you for this conversation. And thank you to those in the audience sticking with us. Much love.